I was called out to a domestic disturbance in Fresno around 2 a.m. in the summer of 2017. It had been one of those hot nights where the heat didn't really leave the air, even after midnight. The kind of night where the pavement still radiates warmth through your boots, and the humidity just makes you feel sticky in the vest. Dispatch said multiple neighbors had called in reporting screams from the house. Sharp, loud, unmistakable. When we pulled up, though, everything was quiet. No lights, no movement, not even the faint sound of a TV or a fan running inside. The house itself was a 2-story, older place, stucco walls yellowed with time, roof lines sagging slightly. There were 2 cars in the driveway, both dusty but not abandoned looking. One was an older Honda sedan, the other a white minivan with a faded bumper sticker about a local church. The street was a typical residential one. Narrow sidewalks, patchy grass lawns, chain-link fences around some of the properties. Everything else was still. It was the kind of silence you don't expect in a neighborhood at that hour. Usually there's a dog barking or someone's swamp cooler running, but here it was dead quiet. My partner, Sanchez, looked at me as we approached. He didn't need to say anything. We'd both done enough of these calls to know they could go either way. Half the time it's nothing serious, a couple yelling and things thrown around. The other half, it's bad. Sometimes really bad. The front door was shut but not locked. That was the first thing that put me on edge. Normally, if there's a fight going on, you hear it through the walls, and the door is either locked tight or hanging open. This was neither. Sanchez pushed the door with his shoulder, and it creaked open into pure darkness. No lamps, no hallway light, nothing. We announced ourselves, voices sharp and steady, but nothing came back. Not even the sound of movement. The beam of my flashlight cut through the living room, and right away I saw overturned furniture. A coffee table flipped on its side, couch cushions scattered, picture frames off the walls. One shattered across the floor. The air smelled faintly metallic, mixed with something sour, like milk left out too long. We moved slow, methodical, clearing each space as we went. The kitchen was a mess too. Plates broken on the tile, silverware scattered across the counter, a chair tipped over. It looked like something had gone through the house in a rush, maybe a fight that got violent. But what bothered me was the lack of people. No one hiding, no one unconscious, nothing. It was just emptiness. When we went upstairs, the floorboards creaked loud under our boots. The first 2 bedrooms were empty, one set up like a kid's room with posters on the wall, the other just storage with boxes stacked high. The master bedroom was messy, blankets tossed on the floor, but no signs of struggle. That's when we found the closet. The door was cracked open just enough for the light to slip through. I pushed it slowly, careful, gun up. Inside, there was no clothes hanging, no storage. Just a small mattress on the floor, stained dark in patches. Along the walls, smeared and pressed deep into the paint, were dozens of small handprints. They were low, child-sized, clustered in strange patterns, some overlapping. The smell in there was stronger, stale, like sweat and rot together. In the corner, on a tripod, was an old camcorder. The red light wasn't blinking, but when I picked it up, the screen showed it was still recording. The timestamp on the footage said it had been running since earlier that evening. Sanchez and I didn't watch it there. We logged it into evidence and finished clearing the house. No bodies, no blood trails leading out, no sign of forced entry, just wreckage and silence. It was unsettling in a way that's hard to put into words. You expect cause and effect in this job. Someone screams, there's a fight, there's injuries. Here, it was like the aftermath without the event. Back at the station, we sat down to review the footage. It started simple, grainy footage of the family sitting at the dinner table. Husband, wife, 2 kids. The room was quiet except for the scrape of forks on plates. They didn't talk much, just ate. For several minutes, it looked normal. Then, slowly, one by one, they turned their heads toward the camera. Not quickly, not in shock, but in a deliberate, steady movement. First the youngest kid, then the older one, then the wife, finally the husband. All 4 just stared directly into the lens, not blinking, not smiling, not saying a word. The recording held like that for nearly a full minute. Then the husband stood, walked toward the camera, and placed his hand over the lens. The screen went black. That was the end of the footage. We ran every lead we could. The vehicles were registered to the family. The house was theirs. We checked hospitals, jails, shelters. Nobody had checked in, nobody had been seen. Relatives said they hadn't heard from them in weeks. The neighbors swore they'd heard screaming that night, multiple voices, but couldn't describe details. For days we canvassed the area, searched empty lots, even drained a nearby canal. Nothing. No bodies, no evidence beyond what we'd already seen. The handprints in the closet were tested, partial smudges, no full prints. The stains on the mattress came back as a mix of old food, dirt, and trace amounts of blood, but not enough to confirm a crime. The camcorder footage haunted me the most. I'd replay it, looking for any clue, any background noise, any reflection in the glass of a picture frame that might explain it. But there was nothing, just that family eating quietly, then staring, then the hand closing in. The case went cold within months. No suspects, no evidence strong enough to push further. The file sat in a drawer marked unresolved. But for me, it never sat right, because in this line of work, you learn patterns. You learn the rhythms of domestic violence, of crime scenes, of people trying to hide their messes. This didn't match any of them. It wasn't chaotic enough. It wasn't random enough. It was something else. Every once in a while, when I drive certain calls in the dead of night, I think back to that house. I picture the closet, the handprints, the silence that hung in the air when we stepped through the door. The family didn't just vanish. Families don't just vanish. Something happened in that house, and I don't think we'll ever know what. That summer in Fresno left me with plenty of bad memories, but that call sits heavier than the rest. Because it wasn't just a crime we couldn't solve. It was an absence we couldn't fill. A gap in the story that stayed open no matter how many reports we wrote. And the worst part is knowing that somewhere those cars are probably still registered, that address still exists, and that file still sits cold in a drawer. A family once lived there, had dinner there, screamed there, and then nothing, just nothing. And in this job, silence like that is the loudest thing you'll ever hear. During training back in 2009, our unit was sent to clear out an old sheriff's substation outside Holbrook, Arizona. They told us it was part of an exercise. Get used to entering abandoned buildings, checking them room by room, making sure we knew how to deal with confined spaces and unknown conditions. On the map, it looked like nothing more than a dot along the highway. When we finally pulled off the main road and drove up to it, I understood why it had been forgotten. The place sat half buried in dust, set back from the cracked asphalt on a stretch where the desert seemed to eat everything alive. The building was small, maybe the size of a double-wide trailer. Square, concrete block construction, a flat roof that sagged in the middle, bars on the windows rusting away. Weeds and dry brush had swallowed most of the yard. No lights, no signs. Just a plain door with peeling paint and a county star still faintly stenciled on the surface. When we stepped inside, the air hit like walking into a tomb, thick with dust, stale, the kind of smell that settles when something hasn't been touched in decades. My boots crunched on grit that coated the floor. Paint peeled from the walls in long flakes. There were 3 cells in the back, 1 office up front, and a small holding room with a steel bench bolted to the floor. The layout was simple enough, but every corner seemed to sag with the weight of years. We moved through as a group, clearing each space the way we'd been trained. Check the angles, check behind the doors, check under the bunks. Nothing inside but trash, broken chairs, and the husks of old filing cabinets that had been gutted long ago. I lagged behind when we got to the last cell. Something about it pulled at me. The bars were still solid, but the door hung slightly off its hinges, as if someone had slammed it too hard, too many times. I stepped inside, sweeping my flashlight across the concrete walls. That's when I saw it. The words were carved deep into the back wall, letters gouged by something sharp, each one jagged and angry. Still here, still waiting. The phrase was low enough to be at eye level if you were lying on the bunk. Underneath it, I noticed the cement had been scratched raw. Dozens, no, maybe hundreds of grooves all clustered beneath the message. At first I thought it was graffiti, But the marks weren't shaped like letters or drawings. They were scratches, fingernail scratches. I crouched closer, running my gloved hand along them. They were uneven, ragged, dug deep in places, shallow in others. Some had small dark stains at the edges, long dried. It looked like someone had tried to dig straight through the wall with nothing but their bare hands. The image stuck with me for the rest of the exercise. When we finished and loaded back into the van, I couldn't shake it. The others joked about the building being a rat nest, about the smell of rot, but none of them mentioned the writing. Maybe they hadn't seen it. Maybe they had and just wanted to pretend it wasn't there. That night, back at the station, the senior officer told us over dinner why the substation had been shut down. He said a prisoner had hung himself in that exact cell sometime in the late 80s. They found him swinging from the bars with a strip of blanket tied around his neck. After that, the county stopped using the place. Too small, too isolated, too much bad history. Most of the guys laughed it off, made dark jokes about it, but the story sat heavy with me. I couldn't stop picturing that writing on the wall, the fingernail scratches, the idea of someone spending God knows how long clawing at solid cement, desperate to get out, desperate enough to bleed for it. Weeks later, when training had moved on to other things, I found myself driving back out there. I told myself it was curiosity. I wanted to see the place again in daylight, without the team, without the structure of the exercise. A way to prove to myself it had just been an old piece of graffiti and nothing more. The desert sun hit the building hard, bleaching it out against the sky. I parked a little ways down the road, got out, and walked across the dirt lot. My boots stirred up little clouds of dust that hung in the air. Inside, the light from my flashlight was replaced by shafts of sun cutting through broken blinds and cracks in the roof. The place looked smaller, less threatening, but still wrong somehow. The silence pressed in. Not even the sound of wind made it through the thick walls. I went straight to the last cell. My stomach was tight, like I already knew I wouldn't like what I'd see. The message was still there. The same words carved into the wall. Still here, still waiting. But the scratches underneath, they were different, deeper, fresher. The edges weren't dulled by dust anymore. They were sharp, white against the gray cement, like they'd been made recently. I stood there a long time, staring, trying to make sense of it. There was no way they had looked like that before. I remembered the way my glove had snagged on the rough edges weeks ago. They'd been old, worn, filled with grit. Now they looked like something had kept working at them after we left. I ran my hand over them again. My fingertip fit perfectly into one of the grooves. The scratches were narrow, the right width for human nails. Some were long and shallow, others short and jagged, as if the person had ripped chunks out of the wall in frustration. I told myself maybe I'd missed these before. Maybe the angle of my flashlight made them look older than they were. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Standing in that cell, I felt a pressure behind me, like the walls themselves were leaning closer. The air was heavier there than anywhere else in the building. I had the sudden urge to get out, to step back into the sun, but I forced myself to look longer, to memorize it. When I finally did step out, I noticed something else. On the inside of the cell door, near the handle, were scratches too. Not as deep, but still there, as if someone had clawed at the steel until their nails broke off. I didn't stay long after that. I walked back out to my car, trying not to look over my shoulder, trying not to imagine hearing fingernails scraping behind me. I never reported what I saw. What would I have said? That the scratches looked newer? That someone had gone back into a locked, abandoned cell and kept clawing at the cement? Nobody would have believed it. They would have said I was spooked, seeing what I wanted to see. But I can't forget it. To this day, when I think about that cell, I wonder who left those marks. Was it the man who hung himself, slowly losing his mind before he made the rope? Or someone before him, left too long in a concrete box with nothing but their own hands? And if it was just old damage that I missed the first time, why did it feel so fresh when I touched it? Why did I walk away with dust under my fingernails that didn't feel like it had been sitting there for 20 years? The substation is gone now. I heard the county finally demolished it a few years back, cleared the lot to keep kids from breaking in. But every so often, when I wake in the middle of the night, I swear I can still feel the grooves under my fingertips. Deep, raw, desperate. The kind of marks that don't fade just because the building is gone. In 2015, I was working night shift out on I-90 east of Cleveland. February that year had been bitter cold. The kind that stings your face even when you're just walking from the cruiser to a gas station door. That night, the temperature was hovering near zero, with wind gusts that cut across the highway like blades. At 3 in the morning, the road was empty except for the occasional long-haul truck or a lone car pushing through the dark. The radio was quiet. I had been sipping lukewarm coffee, fighting the drag of exhaustion that comes when you've been awake too long and the heater inside the cruiser makes your eyelids heavy. It was around 3 a.m. when I first saw her. I was eastbound, about 20 miles past Cleveland, where the road starts to feel lonelier, stretches of nothing but snow-packed fields, frozen ditches, and the dark outlines of leafless trees. My headlights caught a figure ahead on the right shoulder. At first, I thought it was a drunk driver who had wandered away from a car, or maybe a transient trying to walk through the night. She was thin, wearing what looked like a pale nightgown. The fabric fluttered in the wind, and her feet were bare against the icy pavement. She moved slowly, steady, arms loose at her sides. I eased onto the shoulder, lights on, the red and blue washing across the empty highway. My tires crunched over salt and frozen grit. I expected her to stop, to turn toward me, maybe wave or stagger, but she didn't. She kept walking, head slightly bowed, as if she didn't even notice the cruiser pulling up alongside. I opened the door, the cold slamming into me the moment I stepped out. My breath came out white, curling in the air. The wind blew hard enough to sting my eyes, and I had to grip the door to steady myself. The sound of the highway, constant wind, the hum of distant engines, made everything feel hollow, like being alone in a vast cave. I called out, but my voice was eaten by the gusts. She kept walking. I followed her, boots slipping on patches of ice, my flashlight beam cutting across the road. The closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The gown she wore looked thin, almost sheer, the kind of thing no one would choose to be in outside in February. Her skin was pale, her hair loose and dark, whipping in the wind. I picked up my pace, trying to reach her before she froze to death. And then she was gone. 1 second she was 10, maybe 15 feet in front of me, the white of her gown clear against the black road, and the next there was nothing. The shoulder was empty. My beam swung across the snow, the ditch, the bare trees beyond. Nothing. No footprints in the thin snow crust. No drag marks. No broken stride leading anywhere. Just empty highway stretching out into the dark. I stood there, heart pounding, my breath fogging the air. I felt stupid, confused, even a little scared in a way I couldn't admit to myself. The wind tugged at my coat, and I could feel my fingers already numbing through the gloves. I swept the area again, crouched down, even stepped down into the ditch, my boots crunching through the ice. Nothing. It was as if she had dissolved into the night. I finally gave up, shaking my head, telling myself I was overtired, maybe seeing things. The human brain can do strange things at 3 in the morning after hours of staring at dark road. I climbed back into the cruiser, shut the door, and sat there for a moment in silence. The heater blasted against my face, but I still felt cold deep in my chest. When I shifted into drive, I glanced at the dash cam. Standard procedure. It runs the whole time, recording everything. I figured maybe it had caught her. Maybe it would prove I hadn't just hallucinated. I tapped the playback. The screen flickered, the faint green glow lighting the inside of the car. And there she was. The video showed her walking along the shoulder, the headlights catching the thin white gown, the dark hair. It wasn't just my eyes playing tricks. She was there. She moved slowly, steadily, just like I'd seen. Then she turned. On the screen, I watched her stop, pivot toward the car, and look directly into the camera. Her face was pale, features sharp, lips curled into a faint smile. She stood there, looking straight into the lens, while I was still out on the shoulder somewhere behind. The recording cut out right there. Static, a sharp flicker, then nothing but a frozen frame and an error message. I tried to reset it, but the system had locked up, unresponsive. I shut it down, powered it back on, dead. I stared at the blank screen, the only sound the heater and the faint tick of cooling metal. Back at the station later, I logged the stop. I didn't put in the details the way they had happened. Just noted suspicious person, unable to locate. I mentioned a technical error with the dash cam. I didn't want to be the guy sitting in briefing the next morning talking about a barefoot woman in a nightgown who vanished into thin air. Cops live off dark humor, and I wasn't about to give them a story they'd chew on for weeks. But I couldn't let it go. When I got home after shift, I sat in the dark, replaying it in my head. The gown, the hair, the way she turned to look directly into the camera. That smile. It wasn't warm, it wasn't scared. It was knowing, like she was aware of the recording, aware that I'd be watching later. I never saw her again, not in person, but the image stayed with me. For weeks afterward, I woke in the middle of the night, heart racing, the memory of her face flashing in my mind. I'd be driving, headlights sweeping across empty road, and I'd half expect to see her there again. Every time I passed that stretch east of Cleveland, I felt the urge to slow down, to scan the shoulder. Nothing ever showed. No one believed me. A couple of the guys at the station laughed when I mentioned the dash cam freezing up, joked about cheap equipment, bad wiring. I never told them what the camera had actually shown. That part stayed with me alone. It's been years now, but I still remember it with a clarity that unsettles me. The icy wind, the silence of the empty highway, the way she vanished without a trace, and that face on the dash cam, smiling into the lens before the feed cut out. I know what I saw. I know it was recorded, at least for those few seconds, but the malfunction wiped everything beyond that. No files saved, nothing to show. It left me with just the memory, sharp and unwelcome, burned into the back of my mind. People ask sometimes if I've seen anything strange on the road, working nights as a cop. Most of the time I shrug it off, talk about drunk drivers, wrecks, the usual. But there's one memory I never share, one stretch of highway I'll never forget. Because on a freezing night in February 2015, east of Cleveland at 3 a.m, I saw something I can't explain. Something that should have been impossible but wasn't. And it's not the vanishing that keeps me awake when I think about it. It's that smile. Back in 1999, before cell service reached every corner of the country, we still relied on landlines, radio, and the old roadside emergency call boxes. A lot of younger cops today don't even know what those were. Out on stretches of highway where you could drive 50 miles without seeing a gas station, those boxes were all you had if your car broke down or something went wrong. Wyoming had plenty of those stretches, and I was working night patrol outside of Casper at the time. It was the early hours of September 4th, around 4 o'clock in the morning. I'd been on shift since midnight, running the same old loop, checking the rest areas, pulling over the occasional drunk drifting between lanes, just keeping an eye on things. That night was quiet, dead quiet, the kind of quiet that gets under your skin. The wind had died down, and the stars stretched forever. When you've got nothing but empty prairie and open road, you start to feel how small you are. Dispatch cut in at 4:12 a.m. Their voice was calm, but I could hear that slight edge they get when something isn't routine. They told me they just received a 911 call from one of the emergency boxes off Highway 20, about 20 minutes east of me. What came through was mostly static. In between the static, a woman's voice whispered 2 words, "He's coming." Then the line went dead. I wrote down the mile marker and swung the cruiser around. Out there, 20 minutes feels like forever. I kept my spotlight scanning the ditches, just in case someone was out there walking. My headlights carved through the dark, catching nothing but empty barbed wire fences and the shapes of grazing cattle half a mile off. When I finally reached the marker, the box was standing there just off the shoulder. I'd passed that spot 100 times before and never once seen someone use it. It looked the same as always, metal, sun-faded, bolted into a post. But the handset was dangling, swinging slightly like it had been dropped in a hurry. The cord was snapped at the base, frayed ends twisting in the wind. I parked the cruiser on the shoulder, flashers lighting up the road behind me. No traffic, no other cars in sight. I stepped out and walked up to the box. The prairie night was still, not even the sound of crickets, just the distant hum of the highway and the faint ring in my ears from driving with the window cracked open. When I picked up the dangling handset, I didn't hear the usual dead tone. Instead, there was this faint hiss of static, like when you've got an old radio not tuned quite right. I stood there, listening, and in between that static, I swear I could hear someone breathing. Slow, steady, like they were right on the line. I held it there for maybe 10 seconds before the sound cut out and the line went completely dead. I reported back to dispatch, told them what I found, and requested they check for any abandoned vehicles in the area. Nothing came back. No recent breakdowns, no missing persons reported nearby, nothing. I searched the ditch with my flashlight, walked a good 50 yards each way, and found nothing but weeds and dry dirt. I chalked it up to maybe some kind of cross-line interference or a prank. But a prank didn't explain the whisper, or the way that handset had been yanked hard enough to snap the cord. I stayed at that spot for almost half an hour, lights on, engine idling, scanning the horizon. Nobody ever showed. For the rest of that shift, I couldn't shake the feeling of that breath on the line. It was faint, almost too faint to trust my own ears, but I knew what I heard. I didn't put it in the report exactly that way. Instead, I logged it as a disconnected call, possible vandalism to the box, no contact made. That's the kind of note that doesn't raise eyebrows. The days rolled on, shifts blending together. I drove past that box plenty of times in the following weeks. Every time I glanced at it, I remembered the whisper. Out there, when you're alone on the highway in the middle of the night, those thoughts have a way of sticking. Then, about a month later, in early October, I got another call. This one wasn't vague. A trucker hadn't checked in. His company last heard from him around 2 a.m. while he was running westbound, supposed to stop in Casper and unload by sunrise. He never made it. A search went out, and sure enough, they found his rig parked on the shoulder about 200 yards from that same call box. I wasn't the first on scene, but I got there quick. His truck door was open, engine off, keys still in the ignition. No sign of forced entry, no struggle in the cab. They found him about 50 yards down the ditch, lying on his back. Cause of death was clear. He'd been strangled. The cord used matched an electrical extension, looped tight around his neck. Whoever did it had walked him out of that cab and finished the job fast. The location hit me hard. Same stretch of highway, same marker, same call box. This time, there was no whisper, no warning, just a body. The sheriff's office and state investigators swarmed the place. They combed the area, checked tire tracks, looked for prints, anything. All they got were a few partials too smudged to trace and the rig's logbook, which didn't say anything out of the ordinary. We all wanted to believe it was random. Maybe the guy had picked someone up hitchhiking and it went bad. Maybe a robbery gone wrong. But there was no sign of theft. His wallet was still in his pocket, cash untouched. Load was intact, nothing stolen. It looked like someone just waited, picked him out, and killed him. After that, the call box was ripped out completely. They sent crews to dismantle every one of them on that stretch within the year, saying cell coverage would make them obsolete. Officially, they said it was about cost and maintenance. Unofficially, everyone knew nobody wanted to drive past that spot again and wonder. Even now, all these years later, I can still remember the exact sound of that whisper, the way it cut through the static. He's coming. I think about how the woman on that call, whoever she was, never turned up. No matching reports, no missing person tied to it. Just a broken cord, an empty ditch, and a dead trucker a month later. I don't tell this story much, not because I think it's a ghost tale, but because it's worse when you keep it real. Out there, in the dark, someone was hunting. Someone who knew that highway, who knew those boxes, who knew that by the time help got there, it would already be too late. And the part that stays with me most, the part one can't shake, is that whisper wasn't a warning to me. It wasn't a prank. It was a woman, alive, desperate, caught in a moment I can only imagine. I don't know if she ended up the same way as that trucker, or if she somehow got away. But I know she was out there, and when I close my eyes, I still hear her. Not the words anymore, just the breath. Slow, steady, like someone standing too close on the line, waiting. That was the night I learned some stretches of road never really go quiet. I was a rookie cop in Gary back in 2011, working nights. Anyone who knows that city knows the kind of place it is. Empty factories, hollowed out neighborhoods, houses left to rot with weeds taller than cars. At night, it gets even worse. You drive down block after block where half the windows are broken out and the only light comes from a flickering street lamp that hasn't been serviced in years. It's quiet sometimes, almost too quiet, and then all of a sudden you'll hear a distant shout or the crack of gunfire that echoes longer than it should. My first year on the job, I was still trying to adjust to that rhythm. This call came on one of those nights where the air feels heavy, like rain is coming but it never does. Dispatch sent us to a duplex on Jackson Street. A landlord had called in. He said he hadn't heard from his tenants in weeks, and the rent was way overdue. He wanted us to check it out before he went inside himself. It didn't sound like much, just another welfare check. Those kinds of calls usually ended with finding an empty apartment or someone who had packed up and vanished overnight. But I remember the feeling in my stomach as we rolled up to the house. It sagged to one side like it was tired of standing. The place was dark except for one light on the porch that glowed weak and yellow. Paint peeled off the siding in strips, and the front steps leaned inward like they might give out if you put too much weight on them. I could smell the house before we even got the door open. The landlord was waiting out front, a nervous little man who kept rubbing his hands together. He told us he'd been knocking for weeks, that no one ever answered, and that his calls went straight to voicemail. He swore they always paid on time before this. Something about the way he looked at us told me he didn't want to be the first one through that door. We forced it open, and that smell hit us hard. It was thick, sweet, and rotten, like spoiled meat left in the sun. I gagged into my sleeve. I had smelled decomposing bodies before in training scenarios, but this was the first time in the field. My partner, who had years on me, just pulled his collar up over his nose and stepped inside like it was nothing. I followed, flashlight in hand, gun drawn more out of habit than anything. The living room was bare, just a couch with stuffing spilling out and a broken coffee table. Dust coated everything. No pictures on the walls, no sign of anyone living there, just the stink hanging in the air. We cleared the downstairs rooms first, kitchen, bathroom, back bedroom. All of them empty. The fridge hummed weakly when we opened it, but it was almost bare inside. Just a few bottles and something in a Tupperware container that had long since turned black. We went upstairs next. 2 small bedrooms, one with a mattress on the floor and the other completely empty. No clothes in the closets, no sheets, no toys, nothing. It looked like no one had lived there in months. My partner muttered something under his breath as we turned back toward the stairs, but I didn't catch it. That's when we headed for the basement. The door to it was warped and stuck, and it took a good shove to get it open. The smell got stronger right away, drifting up in a heavy wave that made my eyes water. I clicked on my flashlight and started down the steps. The air grew colder with each step, and I could hear the faint drip of water somewhere down there. My boots landed on cement, and the beam of my light cut through the dark. The first thing it caught was the chair. It sat dead center in the room, not an old recliner or a dining chair, but a metal chair bolted into the floor. The arms had restraints attached, thick leather straps with metal buckles. They were worn from use, the kind of wear that only comes from being pulled against again and again. I swept the light across the walls, and that's when my stomach turned. Every surface was covered with children's drawings. Sheets of notebook paper, construction paper, even crumpled receipts. Anything that could be drawn on had been taped up. Crayon houses, stick figures with big smiles, suns with beams shooting out. Some were smeared, some torn, but they covered every inch of cement like wallpaper. Hundreds of them. The landlord, who had followed us down a few steps, froze when he saw it. He started stammering right away, swearing he had no idea, that he'd never been in the basement, that the tenants had been there for almost a year but never caused trouble. My partner told him to wait upstairs. I kept scanning. That's when I saw the drain in the floor. The cement around it was stained dark. The stains spread outward in uneven blotches, like they had seeped up through the concrete. My throat went dry. I crouched down with my flashlight closer, but I didn't touch it. The smell seemed to rise from that spot. The rest of the basement was empty. No furniture, no tools, no storage boxes, nothing. Just that chair, the drawings, and the drain. I backed away, my pulse loud in my ears. My partner gave the place a long look before we went back upstairs. We called it in, reported what we found. As I filled out my notes, my partner leaned over and told me quietly not to write everything down. He said some of what we'd seen wasn't in the report, and it wasn't going to be. His voice was flat, like this wasn't the first time he'd had to say something like that. I didn't argue. I was a rookie, and rookies didn't question things like that. The landlord was pale, sweating, swearing up and down he'd never been down there. Never knew. We left him sitting on the porch while other units came. By the time we cleared out, I felt like I was floating. My head buzzed. I couldn't shake the smell from my nose or the sight of those drawings taped up like wallpaper. That night, back at the station, I tried to sleep in the car before heading home. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the chair and the straps. I heard the drip of water in the basement. I thought about those kids' drawings. Whose hands had made them? Why were they there? I never got an answer. The case disappeared into paperwork. There was no big raid, no news story, no follow-up that I ever heard. The official word was that the place was abandoned and uninhabitable. Nothing about the chair, the drawings, or the drain. It was like none of it had happened. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep. I'd jolt awake in the middle of the night, convinced I smelled that sweet rot again. I'd replay the scene in my head over and over, trying to understand what we had walked into and why it was buried. I never asked my partner about it again. He wouldn't have answered anyway. Years later, I can still see that basement when I close my eyes. I can see the way the crayon suns glowed faintly in the beam of my light. I can see the straps on the chair, worn down by struggling wrists. I can see the dark stains spreading out from the drain. That house is probably gone by now, collapsed or torn down like so many others in Gary. But I'll never forget it. That was the night I learned something they don't tell you in training. Sometimes the worst thing you find on the job isn't a body. It's the space where you know bodies should have been. And the silence that follows is louder than anything.